Okay, so hello everyone and welcome to our inaugural Seds Online webinar. Thank you for coming. We just want to thank everyone for being here and supporting this new Seds Online initiative so well. We already have over 250 members and we've been live for a little over a day on the new website, which is really great. So thank you so much for supporting this in this new community. We're really pleased to be able to offer this resource, and the reason we can do that is thanks to general support from the International Association for Sedimentologists, and we'll be able to present this for free because of that, so thank you very much to you. So yes, welcome to our inaugural webinar, and we're really pleased to introduce our speaker for today, Professor John Howell. So John did a degree at the University of Cardiff, followed by a PhD at the University of Birmingham. He then worked as a researcher and junior faculty member with Strat Group at the University of Liverpool for 10 years. Then in 2002, he moved to Norway, where he lived in Bergen until 2012, where he then took up his post that he currently holds at the University of Aberdeen as a professor. So as many of our viewers will know, over the last 15 years, John has been pioneering the use of virtual outcrops in geoscience, and that's what he's going to be talking to us about today. So without further ado, I'll pass over to you, John.
Right, thank you, Catherine, and thank you everybody for joining. I think we will all agree that these are very curious times. So what I want to do over the next kind of 40 minutes or so is talk to you about virtual outcrops, and this will be slightly different to the kind of talks I normally give around this topic, because I know that there's significant interest in using virtual outcrops for virtual field trips for sort of backfilling some of the things we all normally do every year. In fact, today is actually the day that I should have been leaving to go to Utah for my annual pilgrimage, and it'll be the first time in 26 years that I haven't been travel to Utah in April to run field trips and do field work. So I'm kind of feeling the pain as much as anybody, I think. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about just a short overview of the background of what a virtual outcrop is and what we mean by virtual outcrops. And then I'm going to sort of talk about some of the new resources that are coming online, and especially this concept of virtual field trips using virtual outcrops. I'm going to take you on a very short little virtual field trip to Utah, where I'm supposed to be on a plane to today. And then after that, I think there will potentially be a little bit of interest in how do you actually build these sorts of things. So I can just sort of do 5 or 10 minutes on the actual mechanism that we go through. There's lots of different ways of building this, lots of different softwares out there, but I can sort of demonstrate what we do and how we go about it to hopefully inspire people, to help people, to sort of enable people to do this so that they're able to generate their own content. So I'm presenting this on behalf of a whole bunch of colleagues. I've distilled it down to a couple of key names. There's sort of full acknowledgements at the end of the presentation, but the main person I really need to acknowledge is Simon Buckley, my co-worker in NORCE research in Bergen, where I was for 10 years. And Simon's been very instrumental. He has a background in geomatics. He's been very instrumental in kind of building a lot of the software solutions and a lot of the sort of general solutions to the geomatics problems, the virtual outcrop problems that I'm going to present today. So take a step back 200 and odd years, and basically the world of geology fundamentally changed in about 200 years ago when William Smith produced his first geological map of the UK. And basically Smith sort of was a surveyor, and he pretty much single-handedly invented the concept of geological mapping. He went out basically on horseback, and he covered the whole of England and Wales, and he produced a geological map, which is pretty famous now, but it actually doesn't really significantly differ from the sort of current offering that we have. What's perhaps more important than that amazing achievement was that Smith actually invented the concept of geological mapping. He was the first person who thought I could display geology on a map. And I would say then, for the next 200 years, nothing really changed. When I was an undergraduate back in the 1980s, we still went out with a paper map and a bunch of coloring pencils and a compass and a hammer, and we wandered around in the field and we made notations onto a paper map. In fact, most places, and my own university included, still teach this fundamental technique of geological data collection. So we can say from when Smith published his first map in 1799 all the way through to the present day, we're still not really doing anything that's that much different to what Smith did, which is perhaps an insight into how pioneering his, or how forward-looking he was. But also, you know, it's maybe time things got a little bit modernized. So I would say certainly from the publication of Smith's first map in 1799 all the way up to certainly the turn of this century, so about 20 years ago, not very much changed. And then basically then we got into the advent of what we call virtual outcrops. And there's a whole bunch of reasons that these became available. But basically a virtual outcrop is a photorealistic 3D model of a cliff. And every pixel in this model is spatially constrained, so we can make measurements, we can rotate the model, and it has a whole bunch of different uses. And so this is just a little example of one we're going to look at in more detail. This is obviously just a video, but it kind of gives you the idea that, you know, you have the 3D representation in the computer, you can fly around it, you can zoom in, you can zoom out, you can make measurements on here, you can make annotations on here. And ultimately, you're already starting to see that, you know, this potentially has use for things like virtual field trips for people who are not able or to travel to the field. It also allows us to collect a lot of data that we could collect in the field ordinarily, but from the virtual outcrop, we can collect that data much faster. So if you want to measure 5,000 bed thicknesses, you could probably do it in a few hours on a virtual outcrop. It would take weeks in the field. The other thing is there are data that we would argue that you can collect from this sort of virtual outcrop that you actually can't collect in the field. I don't care how good you are with a compass. Measuring dips of less than half a degree over kilometers is just something that's basically not really possible in the field. So there's a whole bunch of data that can come out of these. And this is what we've been pushing since we first started working with virtual outcrops in 2004. There was a couple of groups, especially Carlos Aitken in Texas, who were working with this a little bit before us. But basically, this is what our research group has been doing for the past 20 odd years, or nearly 20 years. So we can collect, as we said, we can collect geometric data. We can build reservoir-style models. This is just a canyon in the book cliffs. We can build reservoir-style models. We can extract shale lengths, body geometries, channel lengths, channel bodies, do all that sort of stuff. There's lots of cool stuff we can do with these virtual outcrops. It all started in 2004, at least for us, with the advent of LiDAR. Prior to that, we were sort of just drawing pictures and taking photographs and trying to put scales into our field data. Suddenly, the LiDAR came along, and Jerry Bellion and the guys at the Bureau of Economic Geology were probably the first people to really see the potential of this in terms of applying it to geology. And this LiDAR scanner is a metal cylinder, and it shoots a laser beam at a cliff, and it does that very, very fast, so 10,000 times a second. And every time the laser beam hits the cliff, it records the position of that point. And as it scans round, it rotates round over a period of a single rotation would take the best part of an hour. It will record a couple of million points that map that surface. What we can then do with those points is we also have a camera on top of it that takes digital photographs, and everything is GPS referenced. So we can then drape those photos. We can create a surface from those points, and then we drape the surface with the digital images. And that's what we call the virtual outcrop back in, as I say, that's what people have been using since about 2004. And there's been a whole new generation of LiDARs. We thought this was the best thing since spread when we first got it, as I say, 16 years ago. And then a single rotation of the cylinder takes less than about 6 minutes. Now there are machines that are scanning even faster than that. The biggest drawback to this is you need to be a moderately specialist user to actually use it, and the other thing is it's very expensive. This unit here cost us back then £100,000, so $150,000, and because of that, this was not a sort of technique that got widely adopted by the broader community. We also worked with a few other ideas. This is a quarry in Spain. We coupled a hyperspectral scanner. We mounted it next to the same sort of scanner that you get that scans hyperspectral imagery from aeroplanes. Basically, we coupled it and we put it next to the LiDAR scanner, and we basically overlaid the images from the hyperspectral scanner, the classified images, onto the 3D model. And now you can see this quarry in Spain with a bunch of dolomitized limestones. And all of these different colors are a direct remote mapping of the mineralogy and the chemical composition of those cliffs. So that was a fairly big step forward, and you can then sort of use that to classify how much of the various outcrop is comprised of a particular mineral phase. We also teamed up with a group from Switzerland, a group called Helimap, who'd actually managed to mount the same LiDAR into a helicopter. And now, instead of being able to scan about 1 kilometer of cliff in a day, we could suddenly scan 40 or 50 kilometers of cliff in about 2 hours. And that there is the inertial navigation system for the whole Helimap system, and it's based around the IMU out of a cruise missile. And to show how sort of things have advanced, this was back in 2004 or 5 that they developed this. To show how things have advanced, actually, what goes on in your iPhone now or your tablet is pretty much everything that you see that takes up the 2 back seats of a helicopter. But the cool thing was that with this, we were able to scan really big outcrops, like big, long 25-kilometer sections in the Buckley cliffs. We did a 50-kilometer section up in East Greenland. So we could get very, very big virtual outcrops. Then the next probably big revolution came along in about 2012, when the obvious problem with helicopters and LiDAR is they're all very expensive. We reckoned that we calculated that it costs the best part of $1,000 per kilometer of virtual outcrop to use the helicopter. So, which is kind of similar to the cost of land seismic. So when drones first became started to make an appearance, we saw this as a possibility, not necessarily for doing 50-kilometer long sections, but certainly for sort of optimizing the imagery. So we bought our first drone back in 2012, and this bizarrely cost the best part of 15,000. I think it came from Germany. It was 15,000 euros, and it took about an hour to put it together and everything. And I think it was slightly ahead of the curve, because if we'd waited slightly longer, a lot better units came along for a lot less money. But back then, we were able to demonstrate that you could actually use this drone with a camera on it, and you could fly it along the outcrop, and you could actually sort of create 3D virtual outcrops in that way as well. And ultimately, that sort of then led to, as suddenly there was a massive explosion in consumer drones. These phantom drones, for example, are a really good example of that. And coupled with that, there was an appearance of a whole bunch of new softwares that use structure for motion to recreate the 3D geometry. So you don't actually need the laser. And all of a sudden, with a £1,000 drone and a few $100s worth of software, you could go out. The drones are relatively easy to fly, as most people will probably know, and you can literally just fly back and forwards for a couple of hours, collect a few hundred photographs, put it into the software, and suddenly you've got a 3D model. So you no longer need a £100,000 laser scanner. You no longer need technicians who can offer this good enough for what we generally need it for, via just less than a few $1,000s. And ultimately, this is all working from the drone-based stuff is all working from structure from motion. And the basic principle here is that a photograph is a distortion of the scene that you see. And if you take 2 photographs from different angles of the same object and then pick common points, you can numerically solve the shape of that object. And that's been around, that's photogrammetry, that's been around for for 100 years or so, pretty much since the birth of photography. What's new, though, is all the structure from motion algorithms. Was new 7 or 8 years ago, was the new structure from motion algorithms, which basically allowed you to do that in a computer, a fairly standard computer with hundreds at least photographs, and produce very rapid, very good models that are kind of that pretty much anybody can produce. And basically, yeah, as it says there, that's been around for 100 years. That's the sort of basic principles. A bunch of photographs, you pick common points on those photographs, and you're able to, the computer is able to reconstruct the 3D object. So what we call this is the democratization of virtual outcrop. For the first 10 years or so, basically, it was a it was expensive and it was difficult and there was not very many people doing it, and lots of people were looking at us thinking, nah, don't really get that. And then all of a sudden the drones came along, the good structure for motion algorithms, software came along, and all of a sudden everybody suddenly thought, wow, I want a bit of that, was out there collecting 3D models. So easy to fly UAV, simple to use software, decent workflows. The data can be processed. You don't need a supercomputer. It all can be processed on a standard desktop computer or a laptop. And software, so I'm going to show you one of them, which is the one that we developed, called Lime. Software is actually developed as well to handle these kind of models so that everybody could use them. And all of a sudden, we're at a point where I went to AAPG about 2 years ago, and I wandered around the posters one afternoon, and out of all the outcrops, I think I counted 90 posters that addressed outcrop data, and I think only 3 of them didn't have a virtual outcrop on them. So, and I walked away from there thinking, wow, this has suddenly become mainstream, which is super exciting because we think it's a great way. It's a really good supplement to go into the field, and it's a really good supplement to the way we collect field data. What we decided what was missing at present is what do you actually do with these models once they're collected. And there are, as I said, there are softwares already like Lime and VRGS and so on that allow you to sort of interpret them. But I think a lot of people are collecting them, or our observations are lots of people are collecting them, but they're not really sure what to do with it. There are lots of people doing great stuff as well, but there seems to be a bunch of people at least who are not quite sure what they want to do with these models, but they're quite excited to have them. And then also ways to, and now there's literally thousands of people out there collecting virtual outcrops. We thought it would be really good to have a mechanism of bringing all these virtual outcrops together and potentially sharing them if people feel that they're able to share their data, and to sort of stop the massive duplication of, I think I know of at least 5 or 6 different groups who have been to the Ienza quarry in Spain and collected a virtual outcrop. And it seems like there's a lot of work and a lot of effort being expended to sort of replicate what's already done. So we sort of had some ideas about maybe we can sort of share, and also to view these models over the web. So basically, talking about the uses of virtual outcrops, first of all, I would say that here are a bunch of different uses that just came out of a brainstorming. Relationships in 3D, extract fascies and rock properties, science outreach, field trips, analog studies, virtual field trips, mapping natural hazards, looking at cliff sides. We've done work on volcanoes. We've done work working with people who are monitoring landslides. People in quarries and open cast mines are really interested in calculating rock volumes. We might want to integrate it with other data like GPR and logs. We can use these for creating synthetic seismic. We can use them for building reservoir style models. If we have outcrops that are potentially being quarried, or if a new road cut is being built, we can potentially have time series models where we come back and sort of look to see how the outcrop has changed through time. They're really useful for extracting geometric data and structural data. How big can we measure 100 channels in a big hillside, or can we measure the throw and the width of bolts and all those sorts of things. So there's lots of different uses for them. And you could put those broadly into a sort of Venn diagram of 3 overlapping spheres. So you've got the research aspects, you've got the teaching and the science outreach aspects, and then you've got the commercial aspects. And this would be typically people like the quarries and the open cast mines and things, but also it could be commercial virtual field trips. And ultimately this sort of Venn diagram ultimately has, virtual outcrop studies at the center of it. But the big issue, as I said, the big issue we realized that's the applications, and there are, I'm sure you can think of many more, but the key issue then becomes what about storage and sharing? And to solve that problem, we built a web viewer which allowed us to share our 3D models, the 3D virtual outcrops we'd developed or we'd collected with our sponsors. And this basically came about 4 or 5 years ago, before there was any public 3D model sharing platforms like Sketchfab. Our sponsors were very keen to be able to access our models without having to sort of download all of the data and constantly upload the data, constantly copy the data, and install software that hadn't been kind of QC'd and cleared by their by their in-house kind of IT people. So we developed, or Simon developed, what we call the web viewer, which basically streams the models over the web. And that has sort of gradually evolved. And then about a year ago, we had an idea that we would actually like to make the web viewer public. So we set up a separate website away from what we do with our sponsors, which has now gone live. Many of you will have seen it. It went live about 2 or 3 weeks ago, called V3Geo. And the idea of V3Geo is basically, it's a platform for sharing 3D models. Now, most of those will be virtual outcrops, but they can also be 3D models of minerals, of fossils, of pretty much anything. Anything that you create a 3D model of in the geosciences can potentially be shared through V3Geo. And the idea is that at the moment, it's just there's about 110 models on there that our group has collected. We put those on there just to get things going. And also we were aware that with the whole global shutdown, lots of people were desperately looking for content for virtual field trips. So we made that material available, and we also sort of accelerated the publication or the launch of V3Geo. It wasn't due to go out until September. And what is coming to it will be a mechanism by which basically anybody in the world can upload a 3D model. So anybody who's collected a virtual outcrop from anywhere can basically go onto the website, they fill in a little bit of metadata, and they upload the model. And then that model gets transferred into a special format that can be served up via WebGL, and then basically anybody can find that model. And everything's in the Creative Commons license, so that it's sort of available for anybody who wants to use it for non-commercial purposes. So that's what V3Geo is. If you haven't seen it, it's v3geo.com. As I said, there's about 110 models on there at the moment. Basically, you go there and you click on find a model, and then you have a bunch of filters, which you can sort of filter down by the geology type. It's for any type of geology. The majority of the models on there at the moment are sedimentology, but that's because that's what we do. We are fundamentally sedimentologists, although we dabble in all sorts of other stuff. But hopefully, we're very much hoping that as time goes on, that it will be filled up with igneous models and metamorphic models and structural geology models and all sorts of other things. And basically, it has a very simple data standard. We didn't want to sort of delve into creating really big, complicated data standards, but basically should allow you to sort of find models that are sort of effectively useful or of interest for you to browse. And because of the way the level of detail algorithms that Simon's built into the web viewer work, it's actually reasonably fast to run, and it handles really, really big models. So now we recognize that there's interest in a thing called Sketchfab, and there are other 3D model sharing sites which are out there, and people have sort of tried to build platforms or have built platforms on top of using Sketchfab as a background. We looked into this, and we found that we thought Sketchfab was quite limited for what we want to do. I mean, it's an amazing resource, but it's also it's quite limited in the size of models that you can put in. You can't put in multiple models. You can't add interpretations. It doesn't handle very, very big models very well. So we kind of thought that what we were producing here, because it's sort of designed by geologists for geologists or geoscientists, we thought that this was probably or we believe it's a better solution than that. So basically, once you've found your model, this is a typical view of a model from Utah. There's some igneous sills in here cutting through the Entrada sandstone. You can make basic measurements in here. You can change the brightness, you can change the vertical relief and so on if that helps you. And you can basically effectively fly around that model. And I think for many people, even just having that as a resource when they're trying to teach classes or when they're trying to sort of fill in for field classes that have been cancelled is really useful. We use it with our students. When we take our students out to the field, very often we will show them the 3D models before we go out to the field, and we will make the 3D models available for them when we get back from the field. So it's possible to sort of get a refresher. But even if you can't go to the field, we think it's a really useful resource to sort of show people what rocks in the field look like. And obviously because they're virtual outcrops, you know, there's no trudging up a hill to look at things. You can fly around them very, very quickly, and you can get a lot of the learning experience extremely rapidly. And what we're working towards is we have, on the version we have for our sponsors, we're able to add in overlays and interpretations. That will be coming to V3Geo. So if somebody makes an interpretation, they can drape it over the outcrop, so you can sort of see that. Obviously, in this case, these have been sort of interpreted as sand-dominated channel fills, petrolithic deposits, and so on. And there will be sort of the potential for putting in multiple overlays where if different people have different interpretations and things like that. So basically, the next big thing we've just announced today, so it's super exciting, hot off the press, is that V3Geo is now also connected to Lime. Now, Lime is the desktop software. Works on a laptop, but it's the software that sits on a computer that we use for all of our interpretation of the building 3D models. And the idea here is now, if you've got a copy of Lime now, or if you go and download a copy of Lime, a new version, and I'll show how to do it, but you can basically go in here and you can go and browse V3Geo and you can find a model and you can actually download that model and view it on Lime. And Lime provides you a whole bunch of extra opportunities, which I'm sort of going to demonstrate through a virtual field trip I'm going to take you on. But it allows you to look at multiple models. It allows you to have overlays and all sorts of other information like logs and sections and synthetic seismic and all sorts of other sort of things in your model. So if you really want to build virtual field trips, then Lime is the way to go. And the beauty is that it's not downloading the data. It's actually using the data that's in the cloud for building the virtual field trip. So you're never having to download gigabytes of data and transfer gigabytes of data and things to students. So if you generate a virtual field trip, you package that virtual field trip up, you send it out to the students. They actually are just getting the models out of the cloud. So you're never having to move really large volumes of data around. So as it says there, version 2 will load directly the models from V3Geo from the cloud. That's actually arrived today. So basically now I'm going to show you what we can do. I'm going to take you on a virtual field trip to the Buckley. And then that'll take 10 or 15 minutes. And then at the end of that virtual field trip, I'll just give you a brief overview of how that kind of virtual field trip, how anybody can create that kind of virtual field trip in Lime. And hopefully that's what people are really interested in, because they want to sort of, as I say, create virtual field trips to fill in the space. So we'll come back to PowerPoint. Let me jump out of PowerPoint and take you into Lime. So this is Lime. So basically, and what I'm going to do is basically, I'm going to present the next sort of 10 minutes or so actually specifically out of Lime. So yeah, this is a short part of this is a much longer field trip, and I've sort of cut it down for the purpose of this. We're just going to go and do one part of this field trip. So it was a multi-scale sort of virtual field trip. And what you can see is that I have a virtual outcrops in here, but you're not even seeing the virtual outcrops at the moment. You're just seeing basically a panel with the title for the trip. We like to start out, as I say, this is a virtual multi-scale trip. So we start out globally. We're just showing people, this is just a screen grab out of Google Earth, and basically it just sort of shows people where we're going. And it also shows us where we're going in time. So this is one of Ron Blakey's awesome paleogeographies that I've just draped onto a panel. And you can see that we can sort of toggle back and forth between what North America looks like today and what North America looked like back in the late Cretaceous. And we can say that, yes, we're going in here, we're going to Utah, and we're going to be on this sort of shoreline of this western interior seaway. So then we can kind of zoom in, we can go into Utah, we can look at a more specific paleogeography if that's of interest. So there again is the state of Utah. We're just sort of in this area in here, and and toggling to a slightly younger paleogeography, you can see that these shorelines are all sort of prograding through time. Then as we sort of zoom in more detail, kind of zoom into the Buckley area in the center of Utah there. Now this is just a standard satellite photograph of the Buckley. The Buckley are this kind of escarpment running around here and then heading all the way off to Colorado. And they're on the edge of this Laramide uplift, this San Rafael swell sitting here, which is a massive anti-formal structure. That's about 100 kilometers across there from across that structure. And the main escarpment, the place we're going to go to today, is basically down here, a place called Thomson Canyon. We can drape all of this over the digital terrain data. So yeah, we're going into Thomson Canyon down in here. Another part of this trip, which you guys aren't going to see today because of time, is this Buckley section in here. We can drape the geology map over the terrain, and now we have a digital terrain model in here with the geology draped over it. And this kind of khaki brown color here is the Mesa Verde group. That's is the Black Hawk Formation rather. That's the bit we're sort of really interested in. And we can sort of couple that in with the virtual outcrop. So now if we head over to Thomson Canyon, so this is a small canyon in the Buckley. So this is the terrain data now just displayed as a wireframe, but this is the virtual outcrop that we're looking at. And you'll see I'm just kind of toggling through this, but at any single time I can sort of break away from that, and I can just use my mouse and I can navigate around this model, and I can go off sort of explore. The students can go off exploring on their own to sort of have a look around. If we zoom in and just look at that virtual outcrop, we're looking at a virtual outcrop that's about 2 kilometers long by 500 meters wide. That's a 20 meter schools in here, just for scale. Those are sort of mini buses from the field trip that we were running the same time I was kind of collecting these data. And basically one of the first classic stops on this field trip is to look at this succession here, which is an estuarine package. So these are shore faces down here and up here, and sitting inside that shore face is this estuarine package with these inclined heterolithic strata. And I can sort of look at a log through that. And this is a well that was drilled by Exxon just behind the outcrop for research purposes. And basically you can see that, here is that estuarine package. Here's those kind of intertidal inclined heterolithic strata. Those are the shore faces that correspond with there. And I can actually, there's a core available from that well. I can go look at that. I can look at sort of that core, and I can sort of get the students or whatever to sort of look at the core on here. And I can also get them to sort of, fly in and explore this package. And you can see that as I sort of fly in, that there is, I can measure it if I want to with a measuring tool, but that's about a couple of meters. That's 4.2 meters. And basically, yeah, that gives you sort of idea of the sort of scale. And you can see individual beds in here. This is not the highest resolution model, but you can see individual beds that are sort of a few centimeters thick. So then another really powerful thing of this is just to relate it to a modern analog. So this is interpreted as an estuarine succession. Just ignore my students, sorry about that. This is interpreted as an estuarine succession. So this is just another satellite image from a modern day estuary in Wales. This is the Barmouth estuary. And basically now I've laid the virtual outcrop next to the estuary just to show that the sort of bed forms and things we were looking at in there are sort of large scale subtidal to intertidal bar forms. I can sort of overlay an interpretation onto that if I want. So you really sort of get an idea, and these things are obviously at the same scale, so you get an idea of that's 2 kilometers. The estuary here in this case is about 5 kilometers wide. So you get an idea of sort of really relating the modern back to the ancient, which is really quite a powerful tool. The next thing we can do, we're back looking at the virtual outcrop. That estuarine succession has been interpreted as an incised valley. So you could say, well, here was my shore face, my underlying shore face before sea level fell, cut a valley, and then during subsequent transgression, I filled it as an estuary. That's the sort of the classic Exxon interpretation of these outcrops. You can also then introduce the idea, well, what happened to all that sediment? If we were in a scenario, an exploration scenario, oil exploration scenario, we'd be really interested to know what happened to all that sediment that was cut through that valley and bypassed out into the basin. Now in the Buckley, it's not a good place to go and look at that, but because we're looking at these things virtually, we can say, well, here is the sort of very basics Exxon sequence radiographic model. Here are our shorelines in the Buckley. What would those low stand bands look like? And we don't have those low stand bands in Utah, so we could actually just head in and go to a totally different virtual outcrop on the other side of the world this is a bunch of turbidite fan deposits up a lower slope upper fan deposits from Western Island. And the beauty of the virtual outcrop is we can jump all over the world, and we can take the best outcrops from all over the world, and we can sort of visualize them in one narrative or in one storyline. So I could sort of get my students to sort of really go in here and compare the geometry of these turbidite beds with the geometries and the architectures in those shore face and those tidal beds. So I've got the sort of capacity to sort of jump around the world. And then if we just head back to Thomson, we can also, a lot of what we do is building geomodels from virtual outcrop. So we have a bunch of logs in this canyon. We have some surfaces that have been mapped in line. Those surfaces can be projected through the model. And ultimately we can put all that together to make a model in a reservoir modeling software like Petrel. And then this is the sort of some slices taken out of the Petrel model and then just visualized next to the outcrop, which is really quite a powerful thing. You can see the student who did this work did a very nice job of capturing the sort of geometry in his geomodel, capturing the geometries of these dipping heterolithic, inclined heterolithic surfaces. And we can even sort of test that a little bit further by actually draping that Petrel model directly over the outcrop. So now we can actually see exactly what he sort of was modeling when he built that model. There's a few things here about grid resolution as well. We can also say, well, if we were building a standard modeling grid in the subsurface, we would probably use cells that were 50 meters by 50 meters by about a meter or so thick. So we can create a grid like this, and we can drape it onto the outcrop, and we can sort of start to see what sort of level of detail we're not seeing in our geomodel and how much heterogeneity we're losing in our static geomodel. And we can even obviously sort of do the same thing for our sort of simulation scale model. So you can see that in a traditional modeling grid, you really wouldn't be capturing these inclined heterolithic strata. And this would be a typical eclipse or tempest simulation grid would be even coarser. So there'd be even more heterogeneity within those. So the virtual outcrop's really sort of powerful for sort of illustrating that. We can also say, well, people say, well, it's nice for people to be able to touch the rocks, and obviously it is, but if we're all locked down, we don't get to touch the rocks. But we can do this, we can use the same technology pretty much at any scale. So here is now, we're down to the 5 centimeter scale, and this is a piece of sandstone that was collected from there. And whilst it's not the same as being able to touch it and really sort of get the feel for it, you can see that it's made, you can get students to look at it and say, yep, that's a well-sorted sandstone. It's fine to medium grained, it's got reasonably good porosity, and the grains are fairly well rounded. We can sort of even add in information. So this would be, yeah, that's just zooming in there. We can add into this, into our virtual field trip. That's a thin section micrograph from that same sandstone. And again, now we sort of really see the grain shape and the high porosity. And just for sort of fun, we took it even one step further. And we went down into the SEM. We took the same sandstone into the SEM, and we basically flew the camera in the SEM around just as if it was a drone and created a 3D model in photoscan using that. And now you can actually sort of go at the sort of micron scale. We can sort of see the individual grains. We can see the clay minerals. We can see the sort of quartz overgrowth. So we can sort of see the porosity and so on. So these virtual outcrops, it's not just about visualizing virtual outcrops. It's about, we can use it for visualizing any sort of thing in 3D. So that's basically a virtual field trip. So take you back to the presentation. So you've seen the virtual field trip. That's the sort of, just to give you a flavor of the sort of things that we can do. What I thought I would do now is just use the last sort of part of the presentation, just maybe a lot simpler than you might think to actually generate content like that. So the first thing you would need to do to build a virtual field trip would be to, if you haven't done already, go and download Lime from virtualoutcrop.com/Lime. There are other softwares. I could only talk about the one that we use. Once you've got the software installed, if you have your own 3D models, then there are a whole bunch of sort of how to do things in Lime, little videos on the website. And there are also sort of blog posts and things like that telling you how to do stuff. if you don't have access, or if you have your own virtual outcrops, obviously load them up and sort of go fly around them and have a look and start using those. If you don't have virtual outcrops, then the next thing to do, or you don't have the virtual outcrop perhaps that you need, would be to visit v3geo and see if there is a virtual outcrop available on that website that you can use for your field trip. So once you've figured out whether that's available, the other thing you need to do is to compile all the other information that you are going to want to incorporate into your virtual field trip. Now, most of this information is just image files. So it looks really sophisticated, showing logs and trail models and all this kind of stuff. A lot of that information is literally just image files. And the real simplicity of Lime, the really clever thing about building virtual field trips in Lime, is that literally that's all you need. You need the 3D model and you need the image files. And you can do pretty much everything I've just shown you with just those data. But you need to sort of compile all that, get it all into, it doesn't have to be in the same folder, but I like to sort of organize everything into a folder, which is going to be called the data. Then you need to decide on what type of field trip and what's the kind of reason for your field trip, and then ultimately you just create what we call what filmmakers call a storyboard. This is kind of how I'm going to move around, how I want my students or my participants to move around in this 3D space. And ultimately, that sort of that sort of basically, we consider that there's sort of 3 different types of field trip here. There is basically, you just let them loose, you nest all the data, all the kind of pop-ups you want and things, you nest all those and you let them loose in the virtual space and let them explore it. The other option is that you can guide them through it. You can have a series of stops and you can sort of set custom scenes and you can click on that and it will take you to the next scene and the next scene and so on after that. So you need to decide what kind of field trip you want, create your storyboard, what content, what's going to go where, and then you're going to build your virtual field trip and then you're going to deploy it. So basically, to find models in v3geo, you would basically just go to the website. I'm at home in rural Aberdeenshire, and I have about a 2 to 3 megabyte per second internet connection. So ultimately, I've just got a couple of slides that show how to do this, just because to sort of avoid lag time. But if anybody lives in anywhere sort of slightly more civilized, then I'm sure you will have a much better connection than I do. But anyway, you go to v3geo. You basically just click on where it says find a 3D model. You use the filters or you browse down the list. You click on your model. The model will pop up here, or a page about the model will pop up here with a little bit of a geological interpretation, or sorry, a little bit of a description, sorry, and a load of metadata there. And then you will basically just click on that and it will launch the 3D model. And you can fly around it in v3geo. It's pretty fast. And you can sort of decide whether that's what you want to use. Then go back to Lime, launch Lime, and go into Lime and sort of click on 3D element, and then import from cloud source. And then, so there's 3D element, import from cloud source, and then you'll see import 3D model from v3geo as an option. So if you have your models on your own desktop or you're on your own computer, you can just import a 3D model. But if you don't have them, you can import from the cloud source. And basically, when that happens, you'll get a pop-up box with a similar search tools to the ones you had on the website. If you know the name, you can just basically scroll down here straight away. They're all listed alphabetically. Just click on there, and that will basically pull the model into Lime. And from there, you are then, and that will then, providing you now save that project, that will save that link to that model. And if you distribute this project to students for them to work on, it will take that link with it and it will go get the model off of v3geo whenever they're using it. And this saves you having to have projects that are gigabytes of size that you can't sort of distribute very easily. And then basically I was going to give you a little demo of how, now I'm going to try and give you a live demo, excuse me, of basically what went into building that 3D model, or sorry, that virtual field trip that we were just looking at. So basically I'm here. I've got all my I've got all my content available here in a folder. Basically, I'm going to sort of give you an idea of how you create pop-up content, how you work with panels, how you save the views, and then how you save the models for dissemination. So zipping back to line into this one. So basically now this is a much simpler version of the model with just virtually no content. The only content at the moment is just the 3D model, and there's actually one log in here. And the first thing I might like to do is nest a photograph in there. So if I kind of zoom in and I decide, right, okay, I want to sort of pick a point that's going to be an action point in my model. So basically I just go points, create new points, and then it says give it a name. I don't know, cool. I can select an icon for that. It's going to be a photograph, picture. I then just browse to that on my computer, which folder. Here's my content folder. Here's a bunch of content I've decided I would maybe quite like to put into the model. Maybe I want to put the thin section in, the thin section photograph. And now I just click, I press Shift and click, and that will place that there. And that's it, it's created. Now if I want to edit that, oops, sorry. If I want to edit that, I can edit it like that, but I can also move it around by modify the location. So I can just sort of drag it to wherever I want it. So I've decided that that's where I want it to. I've decided, okay, I want the students to find that little icon as they wander around the field trip, and then basically if they find that, I then click Alt. Click on that, what you'll see is that then pops up, that photograph then pops up here, and I can sort of change the size of it or whatever. And I can put in multiple photographs at various different points within the outcrop, wherever I want. I can also, my points don't have to be outcrops. I can also, my points don't have to be photographs. I can actually nest all sorts of image files. I can actually nest video in there if I want. So if I create video, if I browse to a link to a video, I can actually have a little video in here that when the students arrive at it, they click on it, the video pops up and there's me talking about tidal heterolithic strata, or perhaps it's a video you've got off of YouTube of a turbidite in a tank, or anything, any sort of material. Perhaps it's a modern example, a modern video somebody shot on a beach. You know, any kind of material can be nested into there. So that's the first kind of content that we can add to our virtual field trips. The second, probably, excuse me, the second tool is panels. Panels that are really, really powerful, because ultimately what I do is I go to panels and I go create new panel, and basically I then shift and click, and it doesn't really matter where I shift and click, so I'm going to move it around. It creates a panel, I give it a name, I don't know, Incised Valley, oops, Incised Valley model or something. Incised Valley model. Generally, I click off this aspect ratio lock and snap rotation. I can set the size of that panel if I want, or I can basically just click OK. And then I go to panels and I go to modify panel. I can modify the location just as I could with a point, but I can also edit the panel now, and I can drag it and I can shift it wherever I want it. So so that's my panel. And then the next thing I do is I just go to the panel and put add overlay texture, browse for image file, give it a name, model, browse, and where was that Incised Valley model there? Okay, there. Now, obviously, that's not a very good shape, so I can now go back and edit the panel. If I knew what the dimensions of that image was, I could have done a better job of and I can sort of now decide that there. So that's now in there, and basically, as people move around the model, if that's on or off, I can sort of set a scene so that at a certain point, as they sort of follow the narrative, they've spent a bit of time looking at the rocks in here. The next scene is that model then appears there. If I want to nest another 3D model like that hand specimen, I literally just go into models, import 3D model, import 3D models, and then I would just, oh, there's an ammonite. Let's have a look at the ammonite. So that's imported an ammonite. And there you are, I've just literally just nested that within my 3D space. So, and pretty much everything you saw in that virtual field trip was done using those techniques. It was done either with panels or by sticking points in or by nesting 3D models in. So I nested a model from Ireland. I nested the terrain data. If I have a terrain model, a detailed terrain model, I can import that as a 3D model, import 3D into models. If I go back to the terrain models, where's my Utah terrain model? There you are. That's now imported a terrain model for most of Utah. You can see it's actually pretty quick. And on any one of these, if I go to the display settings, I can see that, you know, texture 1 is the geology, I think. No, texture 1, yeah, there. That's the geology overlaying on that terrain model. That has to be created outside, but once that was created in art. Once it's created, it's imported, re-imported back in. Basically anything that can be done, anything that we do, anything that involves 3D models and stuff can be done using those tools. So then, just to finish up, basically I have a quick little bit of a look into the future. So I've shown you sort of how to build that content. You know, the analog example, that was literally just a panel, a horizontal panel with a satellite image out of Google Earth. If you don't have access to the terrain data, just a satellite image on a flat plane with your 3D model sitting above it is actually a very powerful way of just sort of showing some regional context. So everything you saw was just done using those tools. So I'm just going to finish up by having a little bit of a look into the future as to where some of these things are going, and it's all very exciting. I'll move this again. Go back to where are we? So a little bit of a look into the future. Basically, virtual field trips and virtual reality. I think, you know, an obvious step for this, which we've already started playing with, and other people are playing with this. I've seen lots of really cool stuff going around. An obvious step for this is taking it into virtual reality. So the students, you put it all into a games engine like Unity. The students then put on a virtual reality headset and they actually wander around completely immersed in the 3D space. That's absolutely completely doable in the future. Well, it's doable now. We can't do that directly in Lime at the moment, but it's something that's coming relatively soon. What I think is also super cool, and there's a guy on Twitter called Martin Pratt, and he's doing some amazing things with augmented reality. So this is basically where the model itself is actually projected into your living room, or it's projected. You know, there's this stock photo. I pinched this off his Twitter feed. This is the Salt Lake Valley. That's the Great Salt Lake, and that's the Wasatch Fault running along there. You know, basically the idea that you can actually project these models in 3D into the middle of the room, and then when we're all allowed to actually get back into the same room, you can actually have people sort of around the outcrop pointing and talking and discussing. I mean, that's incredibly exciting. Other stuff. Basically, the public sharing of data. We've launched virtual V3Geo. What's going to happen in the next couple of months in V3Geo is basically you will be able to register as a user and have your own space. And once you've got your own space, you will then be able to, anybody will be able to upload models. And there will be a certain degree of kind of QC just to make sure that they are actually models of geology and not goblins and fantasy figures or whatever a Sketchfab is filled with. But beyond that, basically anybody can share a model. And if you actually pay, that will all be free. But if you then pay, you can have private storage, so you can disseminate models with your own sponsors and things like that. And basically, we're also going to sort of allow the sharing of other content, such as interpretation, and potentially even once you've built a virtual field trip in Lime, you will be able to upload it into V3Geo and make it available for anybody to sort of use and download. We're also working on API for the software, so that basically for V3Geo, so that other softwares such as VRGS and other softwares that are being developed will be able to sort of link into it. It's not something we're trying to exclusively link to our own software. It's just that's how the development's gone. Your model will in the future get a DOI, a unique identifier number, so it can basically be referenced. But what we would love to see is people writing papers for journals such as Sedimentology, and then actually uploading the virtual outcrops that those papers were based on into V3Geo, and that would be sort of linked as a reference. And we've also got some other really interesting options in the publishing sphere, which I'm not allowed to talk about at the moment. But we've got lots of really sort of cool ideas as to how to take this forward and how to sort of make this sort of more public. And we're also sort of looking at expanding into other content in other areas of the geosciences. So at the moment, it's very heavily driven by clastic sedimentology. That's because that's what we are. But ultimately, going forward, you know, archaeology, geography, geomorphology, we sort of want to encourage all of these groups who have similar sort of problems in terms of sharing 3D data, similar sorts of spatial issues. We're sort of keen to get more and more people involved in that context as well. And our ultimate vision would be amazing if we had, you know, if we were able to document, or I should say to document, I did make this in a hurry, to document and share all of the world's quality outcrops. I mean, we've collected, our group's collecting about 500 virtual outcrops. Other groups are, I'm sure, probably similar numbers. New people setting out, collecting outcrops left, right, and center. If we could pull all those together, we could literally get all of the world's outcrops, all the good outcrops in the world in one place. And that would be a phenomenal resource for sort of research and teaching going forward. So on that note, just to conclude, I would say that, you know, over the last 20 years, virtual outcrop geology has gone from being a niche, geeky research area to being mainstream, and that's super exciting. Virtual outcrop models are now really easy to collect and to produce. Literally, anybody can learn to fly a drone very quickly, and the software for processing them is relatively straightforward, and also all this stuff is very cheap. These models, there's now purpose-built softwares like Lime and other softwares for sort of viewing it, specifically allow you to work in it. You can also share those models now, so this is really super exciting in V3Geo, and this is a public repository. All the models in there at the moment are free to use for non-commercial purposes. And as I say, if you load a model up there, that it's implicit that you're making your sort of, unless you pay for private storage in the future, it's implicit that your models will also be free to use for non-commercial usage amongst the community. And super exciting today is that we've announced that, or we've sort of released this new version of Lime, where you can actually load from V3Geo directly into Lime, and then you can go and create virtual field trips. And I hope we will post longer, more detailed how to sort of create these virtual field trips based on our learnings, but I've just tried to give you a little bit of an insight in this short period of time into how this can be done. And I think the key thing is, especially with the use of panels and things, it's very simple to actually generate really cool content. The only limitation really is your imagination. And these trips can then be used for classes. You can literally, I didn't get to show you, but you can basically save that virtual field trip. It doesn't, as I say, it saves the link to V3Geo to the model. The rest of the content's very small. You stick it in a zip file. You send it out to your class, and literally they unzip it and run it in Lime, and they can sort of experience the trip, providing they've got a reasonable internet connection. So basically, you distribute them, and obviously this is really topical at the moment. This is a really key issue at the moment, is this ability to sort of share trips and to be able to create content at a time when nobody's allowed to sort of travel, and we're not allowed to go to the field and do the stuff to teach in the way that we traditionally taught. And as I said earlier, the only limitation is literally your imagination and creativity. And that's what's so beautiful about putting this out to a bunch of really cool creative people. Everybody will have their own different way of creating virtual outcrops, and it's going to be really exciting to see what comes out of this. Now we're sort of giving people the tools, what comes out of this in the short term or in the future. Just want to acknowledge a very large group of people who've worked on this, both NORCE in Bergen, Simon, Nicole, developers over there, and then in Aberdeen, big groups, lots of past PhD students and everything. This has really been although I sort of often stand at the front of this has been a really big combined effort from a lot of people, and especially in the last sort of 3 weeks when we made a decision to try and launch V3Geo. in time for Easter for people who wanted to run virtual field trips instead of their Easter vacation field trips. We had a massive rush and everybody's worked super hard on that. So I'd like to acknowledge all of those people. And I'd also like to acknowledge the sponsors for our current, the phase 4 of our current consortium. They've been really good in sort of agreeing to sort of release some of this data and agreeing to release some of the software that we've developed in combination with them. And I'd also like to acknowledge IAS, Stephen and Catherine, for organising this. And I think it's something hovering around 99 people who've tuned in, and hopefully more people will watch later on. So thanks very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, John. That is fantastic. And really, like, I hope that everybody else can join me in thanking John. Clapping isn't really going to work in this, but like we're clapping for you right now. But thank you so much. Oh, you can clap. Okay, there are some people, there's a clapping emoji that you can use. So thank you so much. It's really exciting. I've been grinning like the whole way through it. It's very exciting. So if people in the chat, they're all saying thank you as well, John. Anyone who has any questions, we've got some time now for people to post their questions up to John. It is very exciting, yes.
Lots of people saying hello.
Yeah,
hello.
So if anybody thinks of any, so while people are typing their questions, presumably, if anybody thinks of any questions afterwards or is watching this recorded, John has agreed to come into the forums to ask some questions, and there's a thread ready and waiting for any questions beyond that, and anything that's beyond this recording too as well. So we have a question from Tim. Any success in getting models into Petrel for interpretation?
So yes, but it's really okay. So the short version is it's probably not practically possible at the moment. We do have a workaround, but it's really clunky and you can't save anything. The one thing is, depending, I don't know where you work, Tim, but there is one of the companies that make plugins for Petrel. They used to be called Blueback, and their name escapes me for the moment. At the moment, anyway, they developed. I'm sorry, I apologise to them, but they have actually generated a Petrel plugin that allows you to take the virtual outcrops into Petrel, and you can then sort of put them next to your seismic, put them next to your reservoir model, and everything. All that. That's really, really cool. At the moment, they just made it for one oil company, but they did say that if there was enough interest for people to buy it, then they would potentially release it to the public. But at the moment, the short answer is I'd say not really. You can do it, but it's very difficult, and I wouldn't recommend it.
Thank you. So we have a question from Fiona. What are the issues with permissions to distribute drone footage of ownership of land, etc.?
So my understanding is it varies from country to country, but basically, as long as people are not in the photograph, as long as you don't have people in the photograph, and basically when you process that, I would say as a general rule, in all the countries we work in, then there's no issues around that, because you're not certainly not as far as we're aware. I'd be interested to hear if anybody knows differently, but we haven't found any issues with that. I mean, technically, I guess it's no different to Google flying an aeroplane or aerial photographs or anything being shot of your land and then being posted online. I don't see it's any different to that. And Seagal, sorry, yes, thanks, Tom. Tom's just said that Seagal are the company that make the plugin. My apologies to Seagal.
So we have a question from Aurelian. Is an eventuality to have connection between VRGS software and B3GO database? ?
Yes, so that's basically what we said about, well, that's up to Dave Hodgetts, whether he decides he wants to plug in. But one of the things that we have talked to him about this, and one of the things that will be coming will be an API that allows you to link, allows him to program a link into his software, and hopefully he will then choose to do that. So that's something that should be coming.
Great. And then we have a question from Max about what the students will need to be able to take part in these field trips. So they need a Windows machine and a Lime license to use the trip. And where do the interpretations of V3Geo come into it?
So basically, that's what you distribute to the students. When you distribute a trip, you save the trip locally on your computer, and then you send that. And it's relatively small because it doesn't have all of the virtual outcrop in it. It'll generally be a few gigabytes, a few megabytes of data. And you then just zip it and send it to them, and they unzip it and open it in Lime. So you're absolutely right, Catherine. They need a Lime license, and if people want classroom licenses, you just contact Simon in Bergen. They're making classroom licenses available, so you can have 50 licenses for your whole class or however many. But basically, what you distribute is distribute that file that you've created, and then it should launch Lime and get the model from V3Geo and everything automatically.
Cool. And we have a question from Nietzsche. John, do you know of, or are you organising field schools on making 3D models with LiDAR?
I don't know of any. To be honest, we have 2 LiDARs sitting in our cupboards that haven't been out for about 2 years. So we literally just don't use the LiDAR anymore. If you really wanted to learn about it, yeah, I mean, I guess if you contacted Simon in Bergen, he's the sort of real geomatics expert on this, so he would probably have a good insight there.
Okay.
And then Xavier, the next one. The model is not made using Lime. That is correct. Yes, the model is, well, yeah. Most people are probably using Agisoft. We use Agisoft, and we also use a couple of other softwares for some of the bigger models. Agisoft doesn't work that well when you've got more than about 400 or 500 photographs. For some of the bigger models, we use Capture Reality for, and there are a whole bunch of other softwares. We're not here to plug softwares, but if you want to get started with this, and yeah, building the 3D models, Agisoft is probably certainly the easiest to use.
Great. So we are getting loads and loads and loads of questions on here. So we'll just go through 2 more, I think, and then I've got a couple of announcements to make about Seds Online. But everybody who doesn't get their question read out, please do not feel disheartened. Just copy paste it into the forums. There's a thread ready and waiting, and we can continue this conversation for as long as it needs to carry on. Okay. So with 2 last questions, if that's okay, John.
Yep, that's fine. Yep.
So we have, can you interpolate points and create surfaces in Lime?
So you can map points in Lime. Yeah, I'm not sharing my screen anymore. You can map points in Lime, and you can also make different strike measurements. It doesn't have, at the moment, it doesn't have a surface gridding algorithm in it. So you can create horizontal planes, but it doesn't grid surfaces. So the way that we get around that is we just interpret the points in Lime, and then we export it as a point set. And then we just take it into any kind of surface gridding package. Petrel's fine, but there's lots of other ones that are sort of easier to get hold of maybe than Petrel. And then you import the surface, and then you create the surface you want, and you import it back into Lime.
Okay. And we have our last question. I was going to ask you about the possibility to upload DOMs, and you answered already. Thanks a lot. Oh, okay. Working on DOMs on Mars and their integration into virtual reality. We're looking for an efficient way to share our model for science, teaching and outreach. And this appears to be it next. There wasn't a question. Okay.
Yeah, we'd be very happy to talk about it. We'd be very happy to discuss that with you. Absolutely, yeah.
Great. So one last question then. So can Lime quantify shapes and dimensions of objects that a user delineates?
Yes, Jim, hi. Yes, basically you basically can make basic measurements in there, like lengths and widths and things like that. What we also do is that there are, again, I didn't have time, obviously, it wasn't a sort of Lime demo, but you can also you can create a panel, and then you can drape the photograph or drape the outcrop onto the photograph as an ortho-rectified image and take it into image analysis software and stuff like that if you want to do that as well. But you can make basic measurements in there, sort of length. You can use the measuring tool, and you can also measure dips and strikes and things like that. That's within the software. there's more sort of statistical tools and things coming in the future, but that's where we're at the moment.
Great. Well, thank you so much, and thank you to everybody for coming along, and just thank you again to John. So if people know how to work the clapping emojis, thank you again. So anyone who didn't get their question answered, I'll just repeat, pop over to the forums. If you have any difficulty finding the forums or using them, please just email us at seds.online.ias@gmail.com, and we can help you out, not a problem. So just a couple of announcements before everyone heads off. If you haven't looked through the website yet, please do. There are lots of exciting things up and resources that we really hope we'll be able to develop as a community over the coming months, years, however long. And also, we're particularly looking right now for coffee break coordinators and leaders. Incidentally, tomorrow we have a coffee break at 10 a.m. London time. So if you're around tomorrow morning, we've had 4. This will be our 5th, and they've been a great success. We've had lots of great discussions and interesting conversations with sedimentologists, and it's just nice to kind of chat with the community a couple of times a week. So we've got one of them tomorrow, 10 a.m. And to access it, the links are going to be on the webpage, which is called Coffee Breaks in our site. We also ask that you feel free to get in touch with us about sharing teaching resources. That is now live. We have a read-only Dropbox file, so you submit your files to us. All the instructions are on the website. And last but not least, our forums have got a few threads going now, one about sharing resources. So we'll put V3 Geo up as a resource, and also there's some job forums as well. So if you're particularly interested about any of the threads that are up, you can subscribe to those individual threads, and anybody who has got questions, head over to the forums now and we can continue these conversations. But I think that's everything from us. Yeah, so thank you again to John, and we hope to see you at a meeting again in the future. So thank you very much.